What's up everyone? My name is REDRUP. This is the It's Not a Phase podcast. On this episode, I'm joined by Leander Gloversmith, who is an artist manager for Future History Management. We talk about what artist management entails, how he accidentally stumbled into the job by looking after architects early on in their career, why joining Future History has felt like a full circle moment, what he loves most about the job, and loads more. Before we get into all of that, if you enjoyed the podcast, then please consider taking a few seconds of your time to help me by supporting it. You can hit subscribe or follow wherever you're checking this out so that you don't miss out on any future episodes. You can leave a review or a comment. You can go and give the podcast a follow on social media. And there's also a Patreon and a web store if you wanted to go one step further. You can find all the links to everything that I've just mentioned in the description of this episode, or you can head on over to itsnotaphase.co.uk. And now, here's my chat with Leander Gloversmith of Future History Management. What's up everybody? Thank you for joining me on this episode of the It's Not a Phase podcast, where I'm joined by Leander of Future History Management. How you doing, dude?
Hello, yeah, good, thank you. Thanks for having me. How you doing?
Yeah, good man. Yeah, happy to have you on. So before we get into like what you do, which is obviously artist management,
Yes,
thought we just take a look back into the past a little bit.
the scenic route, yeah, sure.
So, do you call like when and how you kind of got into alternative and heavier music, and like what the first bands and albums were that
Gosh.
got you in there?
Yeah, I remember it exactly. Um,
Right.
I grew up in somewhat of not a rock household per se, but my dad was a big jazz aficionado,
Right.
and my mum was a mix of like into a mix of like classical music, but then also during the 80s, which was when I was growing up, she was into like big into Springsteen and Tracy Chapman and U2, and then REM. And so I sort of grew up hearing this mixture, like a whole bunch of eclectic sounds. And then I myself, in the late 80s, sort of developed a massive taste for pop music. So I was big on Michael Jackson and Madonna, especially. And so going into high school, had this kind of weird mixed bag of like I was really into like the Joshua Tree and Afton Baby by U2, and then like some Tracy Chapman stuff, and then like Michael Jackson and Madonna and whatnot. And it was kind of all hodgepodge stuff, and then sort of chart music. And then as a result of that, I started watching Top of the Pops religiously. Um, and then one day, Fear of the Dark um, by Iron Maiden was in the UK top 10. Or it might have even been number one. It was a live version of Fear of the Dark that was on the I can't remember the name of the record now. It has a red cover, and Eddie is like Eddie's kind of in like holding his bass like sort of Steve Harris on the front. It was their second live record, and the live version of Fear of the Dark was high in the charts. It may have even been number one, but I hadn't heard a sound like that before. And I was a big comic book kid, so I was really attracted to like the Iron Maiden artwork,
Yeah.
um, and just kind of found all of it quite intriguing, as it were. And so that started me on my journey, and so I got into Maiden, and then very quickly felt like there must be something where the guitars are like louder than this. So so when first hearing Iron Maiden, it was like the guitars were quite shocking to me. But after like a month of listening to them, I was like, this sounds kind of like I wonder what's like next. And so that sort of launched me, and I was at the perfect period at that point in time. It was the metal scene was just like bursting with life, and it was like the era of Metallica releasing the Black Album, Nirvana released Nevermind, Rage Against the Machine debut, Alice in Chains made Dirt, like Pearl Jam 10, like Therapy, Troublegum, like just an insane era of alternative music. And so very quickly it sort of unlocked for me.
Yeah.
And I just within like a couple of months of discovering Maiden, I was like all in on the genre. And so I would have been about 12, 13. And then there was kind of no looking back. But all the stuff from my past, like U2 and Madonna and stuff like that, has always stayed with me as well. So I've
Right.
always been kind of like really into metal, but then also really into like pop and then also stadium rock. And I feel like that's been always my music taste is kind of these drawing from these different things.
Yeah.
So I love it when I find bands that kind of combine all of it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
See, obviously that's kind of like the foundation, and
Mhm.
through the years, that's obviously taken you to where you are now with Future History Management, who you
Mhm.
joined a little earlier this year.
Yeah.
How's that been going so far? Like, still a few months in.
Yeah, great man. I mean, Ryan Richards, our company founder and my boss, uh, uh, is obviously the drummer of Funeral for a Friend,
Yeah.
and he and I go back 20 years. So when I was in a band in my early 20s, I was in a band called Hiding with Girls, and we were part of the scene of bands like Johnny Truant and Sixth, Aconite Thrill, Snub, Dead Life Portrait,
Mm.
Vacant Stare, um, Miocene, Days in December, like, and Funeral for a Friend were like the sort of hot new jacks on that
Yeah.
scene. And we played a very early show with them and a band called Dopamine, um, which is like members of I think someone from Kids in Glass Houses was in Dopamine and really great Welsh band. And us and Funeral for a Friend and Dopamine played a show at Newport TJ's, and I think it was one of the very first shows that Ryan played after their original drummer Johnny left.
Right.
And so we met Ryan at that show, and obviously met Funeral at that show, and stayed in contact with all of Bath really, and it went on to play like a bunch of shows with Funeral, and then always just stayed in touch with Ryan. Um, Ryan and Matt more than anyone sort of stayed in touch with, and over the years, Ryan obviously had a lot more success as a musician than I did. Like my band split up in 2005, but we ended up taking sort of similar jobs in the music industry um, after our bands sort of had their heydays, as it were. Ryan ultimately for a while stepped back from Funeral to focus entirely on band management. Now he's kind of back in, and
Yeah.
Funeral do kind of their career how they do it, this kind of legacy thing. But yeah, so Ryan and I just always stayed in touch and sort of managed, became artist managers at a similar time. And I think it was, I always felt like, and I th we he shared this as well when we first sort of linked up finally this year, was that it was always felt like we were sort of going to
Parallel.
end up, yeah, we were sort of going to end up together at some point.
Yeah.
Because we come from like similar backgrounds, similar sort of music scene, and have been running in parallel. And so when the opportunity came to sort of finally combine uh, uh, earlier this year, it felt kind of a bit fated, kind of cosmic. Yeah, so it's going great. Like it's very nice to have to be building a professional relationship on top of like an old friendship.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
makes for a very natural fit, I think. And I
Yeah.
think we sort of see things quite similarly. Uh, and he's a big like fan of 80s pop and arena rock as well. So we kind of have all of our different sort of tastes in common.
Yeah. You got
Um,
those common
yeah,
interests that kind
yeah,
of
yeah,
mix up
yeah,
and we
yeah.
enjoy the music.
And we just have a general sort of shorthand because we've come up through the same scene, through the same period. So sort of our cultural references, as it were, for
Yeah.
like the evolution of the industry that we've seen are almost exactly the same.
Yeah.
Um, we would have probably both been on Friendster or whatever, and
Yeah.
then migrated from that to MySpace and so on, and so seen the whole evolution of this sort of social media hellscape that we live in these days. Um, so yeah, yeah, it's cool, man. It's a great company to be a part of. I love the roster. I don't just say that as like a sort of a company man. Like I genuinely think we've cultivated a roster of very exciting, very eclectic bands, and I think that that's quite a reflective of the people that work here and like our eclectic tastes. And we come from Ryan and I both grew up in a time when Nirvana and Rage Against the Machine and Alice in Chains and Metallica and Pantera and whatever were all kind of under the same banner,
Yeah.
and things weren't as like compartmentalized and sort of genre niche as they can be now. Um, the scenes weren't as gate kept. It was kind of all like alternative. Um, Headbangers Ball and Kerrang and all the magazines back then sort of celebrated alternative culture as a whole. Like one week you would have Feeder on the cover, the next week you have like Emperor on the cover, and so um, and I think that our music scene is getting back to that now. This sort of general eclecticism, having been perhaps somewhat homogenized for a time.
Yeah.
And so I think our company really celebrates that, you know.
Yeah.
Um, you couldn't get more different than like As It Is and Sleep Token,
Yeah.
different bands,
Yeah.
extremely different bands. But they all belong, they all belong in this community. And I think that you can have fans of both that are the same person.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I'm one of them. So
Yeah. Same.
yeah.
Yeah. So what bands, you said you've got like an eclectic roster. What bands do
Hmm.
you personally look after at the moment over there?
So I personally work with As It Is, Split Chain. So Split Chain is the band I brought in that I brought me kind of back to management. So I took a three and a bit year hiatus until earlier this year um, from management, and was working only in label world for ENFD. In February, came back into management via Split Chain. And then as I was transferring back into sort of management full time to look after them, As It Is were starting to discuss their reunion. And obviously, I was their manager for many years
Mm.
uh, back in the day for the majority of their career. And we've stayed good friends. Patty's babysat my daughter. I was at Ben's wedding. I was at Patty's wedding. Like we're a group of friends anyway, and me getting back into management and them starting to discuss kind of maybe getting it going again out of the hiatus in the kind of original lineup happened sort of again, sort of a bit cosmic, happened at the same time. And
Yeah.
um, they were around my house for a social hang and played me some stuff. And I was like, you guys getting back together? Um, and it was like, oh, well, you never guess what I'm doing. And it just kind of made sense to sort of get the band back together, so to
Yeah.
speak, as like the original unit with myself as well as manager. And so Split Chain As It Is, and then Thornhill have been affiliated with Future History for a time, um, as kind of almost like a partnership with Ben, their drummer, handles a lot of their sort of Australian affairs, and Future History was sort of helping with European and American stuff, but there hadn't yet been like a formal point person. And
Hmm.
because I'd been at UNFD for 3 years and had developed a relationship with the band from the label side, it made a lot of sense with me joining Future History to sort of start running point on Thornhill, especially as I had a relationship with their label, having worked there for 3 years. So I've sort of taken over the running point on Thornhill on behalf of the company. They're a company band, but I'm their sort of point person. And then we just signed a new artist, but that's not announced yet. And so I don't know whether
Just keep your lips shut for now,
yeah,
on the safe
yeah,
side.
yeah. So there's another artist that I will be working with, but yeah, I don't know when we're going to announce that yet. So
Okay.
maybe it'll be announced by the time this comes out. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I guess just, I mean, very simply, I guess if people hear artist management, you they think you just manage the artist, right? But I
Mhm.
guess it's a bit more nuanced to that. So
Yes.
can you kind of briefly explain what the components are of what artist management entails?
The most succinct way to say it, I think, is it's not one size fits all, and it is a bespoke service that reacts, that is both proactive and reactive to the needs of the specific artist.
Yeah,
But stuff that works or that I do for like as it is isn't necessarily the same stuff I do for split chain.
right.
Um, and bands have such different makeups in terms of their personalities and their own internal dynamics. And some bands are very hands-on in terms of their business affairs. Like for example, Thornhill, their drummer Ben Mader is one of their managers really. And so the way that we manage that band is that myself, Ryan, and Ben are kind of the collective managers of the band, and we all sort of make decisions together in the way that a management team would, except that Ben is in the band. Um, and uh, Meanwhile, like uh, Split Chain is more of a I'm very much taking a manager role in the band, and that's not to say the band aren't business savvy, but like they want to more focus on the stuff of being a band,
Yeah,
writing songs, touring, and enjoying that stuff. And I'm taking a more traditional, what you would think is the traditional manager role there. But really, it's in many ways you're a facilitator. You're there to augment um, and realize the band's vision. Certainly, that's how I see it. And it's you're working in sort of service of the artist's vision, and you're working to communicate and translate and realize all the things that they want to achieve, be that artistic goals, business goals. You're kind of the person that is in charge of that. And like I said, that how much uh, I kind of do by myself versus what I do in conjunction with the band depends on the makeup of the band.
right.
Um, but yeah, for me, it's I like the role best when there is a level of artistic involvement. I come from a band background myself, worked in A&R for years. Like I have um I have a keen interest in things like artwork and track listing and producers and mixing and all these kinds of aspects. Uh, uh, and I think for me, that's as much part of the draw of the job as like executing like the right business deals or communicating with agents. Like for me, I like to get under the hood of all that kind of stuff. And so what I seek really in any bands that I work with is a sort of a mutually complementary relationship where it's business and creative.
Right.
Um, I wouldn't, I don't think would enjoy as much like a really straight business relationship. I really don't think that that's where I am my strongest either. Um, some of my sort of most developed skill sets and stuff are in creative, uh, and I love working with bands to understand their creative vision and hear what they're trying to like put out in the world in terms of like the meanings in their music and how do we tie that into album artwork and music videos and stage production and what's their character of the band, right? What's the personality of the band? What are you kind of putting out there into the world?
Yeah.
Um, how are you going to be somebody's favorite band? Like, what kind of artistic legacy are you going to leave? Like, I'm very interested and inspired by that. And so I kind of look for that spark in the artists that I work with. And I try to sort of really help embellish and augment that stuff. And ultimately, like all the vision and all the creative it is, I would never map something onto the artist and be like, you are this. We're not dealing in sort of X Factor Simon Cowell world here. This
Yeah.
isn't like the vision of the executives that sort of go, you're going to be this kind of artist, you're going to be that kind of artist. But like, um, I like to really get involved in those conversations, and I like to be in the studio and in sort of the room and help to to help artists find their voice, and then be like, let's collectively sort of bring these visions to life, right?
Yeah.
Whether that be like we need to figure out how to make, going on past experience, like we need to figure out how to make an 8 foot mask that shoots lasers out of its eyes. That was a creeper project,
Right.
um, you know, um, or just like finding the right artist or the right producer that can like, you know, uh, so correctly bring the sound that the band is trying to create to life. Uh, and so it can be that, and sometimes it's filling in. Today, it's been a lot of filling in metadata, which is filling in lots of really boring spreadsheets
Yeah.
that you have to deliver to the labels so that the songwriter splits and producers are correctly credited in the back end of Spotify and Apple Music or whatever. That is as important a part of the job as anything else. But part of the attraction, really, I guess, of the job for me is that it can be this or it can be this. Um, 1 minute you're working on like really exciting like creative projects. The other minute it can be a little bit dry and very office jobby, but all these things work in tandem together, and you kind of it sounds like I'm about to quote Forrest Gump. You never know what you're going to get, right?
Yeah.
And but, when I had like an office job after uni, like years ago, one of the things that like drove me to madness about it was the idea of the every day being the same. And so sometimes if I'm like particularly dried out by a spreadsheet, I just remind myself that tomorrow it probably won't be like that, right?
Yeah, it's very varied. Like every
It's
day.
super varied, and everything is in balance, and you have to do this to have this, but they all sort of contribute to the larger whole. And I try to just be available to do what the artist needs, you know. And sometimes that can just be like figuring out with a travel agent that the singer wants to travel back from a tour a tour destination on a different day to everybody else, right? And you do a bit of it can be just kind of a bit of everything. Sometimes you're a travel agent, sometimes you're a PA, you know, sometimes you're having like high level business conversations where some of the amounts of money you're talking about are like, oh, fuck, you know, I should not be, should I be talking about this amount of money? Um, but then other times you're just like really in the weeds, getting granular about like mix notes and being like, having long discourse, overly intense discourse about whether the frequency of the overheads in a mix is causing like piercing sibilance or something.
Yeah.
But I love all of it. It's kind of all of these ridiculous things. And sometimes it can be really stressful, sometimes it can be really boring, sometimes it can be awesome, sometimes it can be really shite, but like it's the roller coaster of it and the unpredictability of it that is as satisfying as it is frustrating. So
Yeah.
it's kind of a lot of things. I had once had an artist ask me, what do you do on a day-to-day basis? And it's like, I couldn't really tell you
Yeah.
what I do on a day-to-day basis, because there's so much context of like, well, it depends. What band are we talking about? You know, um, and quite often when you manage a roster of artists, they're all at different levels. They all need different things. Within our company, we have a download headliner, that a main stage headliner that is selling out arenas.
Yeah.
And we also have, on my roster, we have a band that is making a comeback. And we're plotting out how to do that in a way that honors their legacy, but doesn't kind of overshoot, where we think it might be at and stuff like
Yeah.
that. And that's, and then with a band like Split Chain, it's all very new and everything is firsts all of the
Yeah, like no
time.
new album,
You
no
know,
new album yet. So
there's no album,
yeah,
and
yeah.
so everything is kind of like planning the very beginnings of a career. And so, quite often you're talking about a lot of these things within the same day. So
Right.
it's really hard to sort of pinpoint like what is artist management. It's like, I don't know, what's the artist doing? Who
Yeah.
is it? What day is it? Yeah, very long-winded answer to that question, but that's kind of the nature of the job.
Yeah, I think
It's
it's interesting because,
yeah.
like, yeah, I think, like I said, a lot of people who kind of don't really know what it is, they'll just think artist management. That just means like, hey, you're just making sure they do this on this day and this and this day and this and this day, which, like you said, it's
That's really tour management,
yeah,
you know. That's what a tour manager does. I mean, tour managing is a hugely challenging job within itself, but like that sort of day to day, you're going to do this at this time and this at this time and
yeah,
this. That is more commonly found in that role
yeah,
where
a
they're
bigger
looking
picture, I
after,
guess.
yeah, the sort of tour manager that goes on the road with them, who's running the day to day schedule. And just making sure band gets from A to B and has their rider and has what they need and has a fucking towel, you know. Um, but obviously, advancing the shows and all this kind of stuff, and a tour manager is very in the details and the logistics of the day-to-day existence of a band.
Mhm.
Um, whereas I myself, Ryan, we tend to operate a lot more in the bigger picture and like, yes, I have to be reactive to things that happen in the day-to-day, but my head is also in November 2025 in a lot
Yeah,
of ways, and I'm thinking about, today I've been having a lot of conversations about what happens to stuff in September if we move something to January or to February, and like what are the ripple effects of all this stuff, and like I've already had some 2026 conversations, which is just
wow,
horrific, but like because you don't want time to pass like that,
yeah,
but you do have to. It can be quite jarring sometimes because you go from very insular and very granular stuff, and then you have to zoom out, and then you have to zoom back in again. And it's like, how does the macro get affected by the micro? And like,
yeah, yeah,
you know, butterfly effects of absolutely everything. And you have to be able to sort of read the landscape, and sometimes you can't. And it's, right now I'm in a situation where I don't know when a certain project is going to hit its completion date. And uh, it's going to be like by the time this is aired, I will know. But it's
right,
one of these things where it's like I'm living in a bit of limbo on something for a couple of weeks because if something gets finished next week, then it's plan A. If it doesn't get finished next week, it's plan B. And you're literally talking about shifts of months and like this idea only works if it gets finished here and this idea, so it's a lot of hypothetical, a lot of gray area, a lot of like putting things in pencil that, that if that, that if that, that
yeah,
if that. And you're just um you have to be spinning a lot of plates all of the time. And
yeah,
then stuff can just happen, something can go wrong. Uh, you know, Unfortunately, gear can get stolen, vans can crash,
yeah,
shows can go badly, and you can be having a day where you're like deep in the planning, and then you have to kind of drop everything to deal with something reactively. And so, you, again, that adds to the kind of ongoing unpredictability of it. And it's almost pointless to have a to-do list. I mean, you have to have them, of course, for workflow reasons, but
yeah,
like there's no end to it. If you think of it as like a list of tasks that needs to get done, like today I completed a massive project with As It Is that we've been working on for like the entire time that we've been doing this reunion thing, which is like we've been having this conversation since we've been working on something since July, and it's taken up an inordinate amount of time. And really exciting, really cool. It's a super cool project. Something I can't talk about yet, but
yeah,
like it's been a huge undertaking for myself and Patty and Ben, and we just like wrapped it today. And whilst there is like a moment of satisfaction from it, you know, you sign it off and you pass it on to like the next people in the chain,
Hmm.
and then it's like, okay, cool, you got the fucking project done. All right, ah, what's next? You know. And so sometimes it can be important for just well-being to try and see the wood for the trees a little
Yeah.
bit. So today, this evening, my plan is to just try and enjoy a little bit. Like, okay, we achieved, like, we did check a big thing off today.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to try and enjoy that. And hopefully there's no chaos waiting for me in the way. I've probably jinxed it now.
Fingers crossed.
Touch wood. Yeah.
Well, as you've said, like this isn't your like first foray into management. You've done it for
No.
quite a bit. I think one
Yes.
of your first kind of stints was it's called Sulaco Artist Management.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, you have
Yeah.
done your research. Yeah,
So I think you managed like Leander Atlantis and Architects obviously back when
that's
they
right.
first started.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's
I
right.
mean, how was that? I guess I don't know if they were your first steps into management, but also like looking at the where those bands, well, where Architects is now, where Leander
Mhm,
Atlantis got to.
mhm.
How was that?
Yeah, Architects was my first management client.
Right.
Um, so I was working in publicity. That was my first foray into the music business. I was working in publicity for a London company, and my boss gave me the freedom to sign. I was working like artists that were sort of, you know, brought in by the company. I was doing the PR for them, but I was also told that I could scout and sign my own stuff and do my own, you know, bring in stuff. And we wanted to diversify the roster, and he wanted to have a younger roster. So he said you can bring in some stuff like that you do pro bono,
Okay.
in order to kind of build up the, you know, the sort of repertoire of the company, working with some younger bands. And being from Brighton, like I know the Architects guys from when they were fans of my band and Johnny Truant at shows in Brighton. They were just the guys at the shows. And we kind of knew them as like a local band. One of their first shows as Architects, when they changed their name from, they were originally called Counting the Days.
Yeah.
They changed their name to Architects. Um, one of their first shows as Architects was supporting my band at and Devil's Sort of Soul at the Free Butt in Brighton, um, in like God 2005.
Throwback.
And I still have the flyer, and it says Architects formally counting the days in brackets, which is quite funny. But like they were like a local band in Brighton, and I was allowed to take on a band, and so I bumped into Tim in the street in Brighton and was like, "Oh wait, you're releasing a record soon, right? You're doing something. Do you want PR?" And he was like, "Sure." And I was like, "We can do it for free." And so I got the PR gig for Architects, and I worked the album Nightmares, which is the debut
Yeah.
before Sam joined the band. And so I did PR for them for a year, and as it went really well, and we were getting all sorts of like cool press out of it. There was a lot of press around at the time, a lot of magazines, and so we were getting like a lot of coverage, and then they were kind of wondering what to do with it. And increasingly, because we were in a social group as well, because of our locality, um, they ended up, you know, I sort of became like the person that works Architects in the music industry. And then when Sam joined the band, he just sort of assumed that I was the band's manager and
Right. Okay.
introduced me to someone as the manager. And I was like, okay,
There you go.
you know, and then it was just kind of, I was never really formally appointed. I just kind of was doing it.
Right.
And then the PR role evolved into management, and I was on the road with them as well. I was TMing them for a time. So I toured like Canada and the US with them, Europe. And I was doing like business affairs, tour managing. I was doing the publicity still. I negotiated their record deal with Century Media just because I was the person who kind of worked in the music business.
Hmm.
Um, and so those roles just sort of fell to me. And then it wasn't really until Than Atlantis, and Your Demise asked me to manage them that I was like, "Oh, I guess this is something that I could do
Right.
for other bands, right?" I was just kind of like architect's Swiss Army knife.
Yeah.
And I hadn't really considered it as like a career that I could do for anybody else. It wasn't ever really a career that I aspired to. I hadn't chosen it. I just wanted to work in music. After my band split up, I just wanted to stay in the music business. My original plan was to be a journalist, actually, and ended up just kind of going, all right, so saw LTA like at an all day that architects played in like Exeter or something, somewhere really random. Kind of
Right.
thought they were great. It was all like the Breton material, which was like sort of gallows with breakdowns kind of vibes. Mike will hate me for saying that, actually. Sorry, Mike. Um, and but then we worked together on sort of creating the Far Q record, and that was where I got my first real taste of like the sort of artist development, A&R, creative management aspect of the role that I feel grown into now. That came with Far Q because Mike had this real vision of what he wanted Low Atlantis to become that wasn't Britain,
Yeah.
and myself and him and the rest of those guys like kind of developed that aesthetic and the kind of vibe of that record. We sort of all did that together. And that really whet my appetite for like, yeah, this is how I kind of want to do the job. And I feel like since then, that's what I've kind of chased, you
Yeah.
know, doing the job in that way. And so, yeah, like I was with architects for like around 4 years. I worked I worked across the Nightmares Ruin, Hollow Crown records, the
Hmm.
split with Dead Swans. And I booked, or I think, yeah, I booked the studio time for the record that became Here and Now,
Right.
but I never heard any of the demos for that record.
Right.
So they moved on to 5B at the time. Um, uh, they're still with that manager, but he's left 5B and gone to Madden since. Um, but yeah, so we parted ways, and then LTA and I parted ways about a year later. Um, and then I was just kind of with Your Demise for a time, and um, had my fingers burned a little bit at those higher levels because I'd lost bands after building them up to a certain point, so I was
Right.
feeling a bit like raw
Depleted,
from
but
it. Yeah, a bit deflated. And so I was kind of keeping my head down a bit and just sort of working with like in the hardcore scene a bit more, and at the time like the Ghostfest scene, I suppose. Like I was working a bit with Last Witness, Brutality Will Prevail, Demise, all these kind of bands in sort
yeah.
of 2011, 2012, like Ghostfest scene. And um it was just about like ticking over as a sort of um not quite a living wage, but it was enough to get by. I was a bit hand to mouth, but like I was just kind of keeping my head down a bit, I guess. I mean, I don't mean any offense to any of those bands. It was just like, yeah, that's a very different world
Hmm.
to um architects who always had the aspirations to be, a much bigger band. And Low Atlantis, these are bands with like big stadium dreams.
Yeah.
Um, and uh, you know, and then whilst I was doing that, I did came upon Net Deep, who were an unsigned, undiscovered, big on Tumblr hype band that had never played a show.
Right. Okay.
Um, they just had a part of me, which was doing relative numbers for the time on YouTube, and yeah, I reached out to them and was like, I'm really impressed with this song and kind of the vibe. And yeah, you want a manager. And and they were fans of some of those bands like BWP or whatever. And we connected. And then that was like 8 years of my life.
Wow.
And obviously with Net Deep, it was I reached kind of levels of the business that I'd never seen previously, even at like the highest end of architects. Obviously architects have gone on to be a humongous band, but that's not been in my era.
Yeah.
With Neck Deep, I sort of rode all the way up to seeing stuff that I couldn't have sort of ever really imagined back then, especially in the US and the kind of success that Neck Deep had as a global artist. That wasn't something that I experienced with Neck Deep, with Architects, sorry. Like Architects at my time of leaving, that group were just starting to sort of go into the US, and they were doing okay in Europe. It was really like in the UK where they were doing very well. But even then, like it was only like but like at the time we'd sold out. Islington Academy was like the biggest show that I was manager with Architects for, and like a really big show at Download 2009 in what is now like the Avalanche stage, I guess, like a really busy tent, but never worked with Architects as a main stage artist. And so for Neck Deep, very quickly, within a year or so, it had already eclipsed any like high level experience that I'd had with with any of my previous clients. And so for me at that point, because I'd had my fingers burned in the past, made it I made it kind of my mission to always be part of an agency so
Right.
that I wouldn't with Sulaco and stuff like that, that was my own thing. Um, and then I just wanted to make sure that I had like an infrastructure around me, and that um, some of the reasonably identified shortcomings of being like a solo act, as it were, who is just kind of like an email address and that's it, my own network. Um, when I realized how quickly Neck Deep were ascending, I was like, it's going to be very important for myself and also for the good of the band for me to be part of like an agency. So I was with uh, two different agencies with Neck Deep. So we were with KMGMT for many years, and then moved to a company called IE
Right.
for a couple of years. Um, and that was kind of those 6 years are like the majority of my time with Neck Deep. We're like working for them at a company, but where I also had like colleagues and other people like working on the band with me. So big team efforts, for Neck Deep, like Hopeless were an amazing partner, and they have had still have great agents, same agents, and it was very much a team effort, but like um, very new but very exciting experience for me to kind of be like running point on these kind of global teams,
Yeah.
and that in many ways like Neck Deep is the start of the the sort of chapter of my career that I'm in now. Like Architects and LTA and that stuff is kind of like the fledgling years, and then from sort of Neck Deep is kind of almost patient zero, as it were, for like where I am now, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, and so with Neck Deep and As It Is and Creeper, that was those were kind of my years of really learning um, at the higher levels of the music business, sort of main stage acts, global acts. And I hit burnout with that after a time, especially because of COVID.
Yeah.
Um, uh, that contributed to it. Um, and so I took a few years away. At the time, I thought this is it for me. Like I'm not doing band management ever again. Like I felt like I felt fully burned. Um, but working in label world um, was very healing. It was a healing time. I could work with bands like in a purely creative capacity, and that helped me over the course of 3 years, like rebuild, like lick my wounds from the burnout and still continue to work with and be inspired by music, but like work with loads of different bands and kind of uh, not get as involved um, as you do when you're a band manager.
Yeah.
Um, but at the end of that sort of period, so the start of this year, um, for one reason or another, sort of convergence of different things ended up feeling like I'm actually really up for getting back into it.
Yeah.
And Split Chain was the perfect band for me. They just came, again, I keep saying cosmic, but it really has felt that way. Like they came up for me at the exact right time where I was considering getting back into it. And like that band encapsulates a lot of what I love. Um, they're like all the band. They remind me of so many bands that I grew up on, and um they sort of excite my teenage brain.
Yeah.
Like, if I think of me at 14, like I'm definitely like the biggest Split Chain fan in the world, you know. I just think they're a great band and they're great people. Um, and they just remind me a lot of myself and my friends. And there's something about what they evoke musically and with their aesthetic and stuff. It just really speaks to me.
Yeah.
And so there was just something about it that I was like, I got to do this. This is like the most me. This is the most me band.
Yeah. Like the moment
And it,
just aligns.
yeah, it just aligned.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're having a great time. So, got a lot of exciting things. I can say they are right. They're in the studio right now, finishing their record.
Yeah. Right.
Um, so they're about 2 weeks out um from being done. So
Wow.
they're down in Middle Farm Studios in Devon, making a what I think is a very good debut album. So, yeah, very exciting times. Obviously, we have a great label team in Epitaph, and so lots of things, very exciting things on the horizon. Their first US tour kicks off January 10th, with Silverstein and Thursday. So like, I'm a huge Thursday fan. So it's like awesome to see these guys like going out with like a band that I remember, buying Full Collapse, and
Yeah.
it's still one of my like top 20 goated records. So for me personally, it's just this awesome moment to have like my guys touring with them, and Silverstein's a great bunch of people, so supportive of young bands. They're about to announce, by the time this is out, this is be public, but they're about to announce Arm's Length on that tour as well. So,
Right.
and then in the UK version of that tour, they have Callous Boys, and Bloom, and so Silverstein's very much like using their platform to like bring the new bands through and stuff, and I just think that's really a very important, cool thing to do. So yeah, very excited to have them be a part of that, and just got announced on Download, and we have a lot of future history artists on Download. Obviously Sleep Token, but also Split Chain and Dead Pony and Amira, Elfeki. So yeah, it's gonna be a fun year.
Yeah. Yeah. I think something that you said that's quite interesting there is, and I've noticed this with quite a few people that work in the industry, is of course there's some people that like go either traditional route, they'll apply for a job, they'll get the job, blah blah blah. Whereas you kind of just fell into it and you did the job to get the
Mhm.
job.
Yeah,
I think
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've learned the job by doing the job, and I have never applied for a job in music. I applied for an internship at Warner Brothers Atlantic in in 2005, at the very start of my career. My band split up, and Warner at the time did something called the Warner Graduate Scheme, where it was almost like an X Factor for working at a record label, and you had to go through like these elimination stages. Um, you went up to Warner's and you did all these activities and you did like one-on-one interviews and blah blah blah, and it was kind of like who's going to be the beneficiary of the graduate scheme. And at the end of it, it was like one or two people got a job. Um, and I didn't get a job, but I got to the final 10 people, and they then asked me whether I would like an internship. And so I did a summer internship at Atlantic Records in the publicity department,
right.
which is where I then happened to come upon a posting on Record of the Day, which I would have never seen had I not been at Atlantic for my publicity job. And then I applied for that publicity job, got that job, and then since then have never applied for another job. It's just been like I kind of invent the jobs.
Yeah.
I'm like, who do I want to work for? What do I want to do? Who do I want to work for? And I just kind of go and sort of sell myself
Yeah.
to, I don't suppose you've got a job and we could do this. And a lot of it has come from meeting people and feeling like you're on the same wavelength and sort of collaborating to be like, hey, we'd really like to sort of work together. Let's sort of find a way to do that. And that's very much like how Ryan and I came together. Like, um, I actually approached him a few years ago, long before the sort of sleep token boom, when he'd first sort of set up Future History, and it was very much just Ryan. And I was moving with Neck Deep. We were leaving KMGMT and we were looking for a new setup. Um, and I wanted to speak to Ryan then about partnering.
Right.
Um, but stars didn't align. Me and Neck Deep went to IE. But when I was coming back into management, it was like literally top of my list. I was like, the first call I am making is Ryan. And I
Right.
just feel like there's, you know, and when we had our first call, like on that call, he said, like, I feel like this is almost like been inevitable that we're going
Yeah.
to do this. And then we just sort of figured it out, like Future History didn't post going, we're looking for new managers.
Mm.
It's just, we just kind of figured out a collaboration and like all my jobs have kind of come about that way. Like with Net Deep, I knew I needed an agency. So I flew out to LA on my own dime for a week, slept on Eric Tobin, the VP of Hopeless, who Net Deep had signed to, slept on his couch for a week, and Eric just introduced me to every single manager he possibly could, and I just did lunch after lunch after lunch. Um,
Not
I,
expensive.
yeah, yeah, yes, in LA, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but at the time I was, I literally just had myself and Net Deep, and I was just out there in LA for a week, just meeting people, talk like almost like speed dating, sort of meeting all these different people, and what kind of the awesome thing that came from that, obviously, like I got a job at the end of it with KMGMT, which at the time was very closely aligned with Warp Tour, which was obviously like hugely beneficial for NetDeep's career.
Yeah.
Um, but a lot of the people that I met during that week ended up being people that I collaborated with over the years because it was like the manager of Taking That Sunday, the manager of Knuckle Park, the manager of State Champs. Like I just, met all these different people in that week, and it sort of helped create my US network, which was then vital for um, for NetDeep over the years and for myself. And so really, it's just kind of like trying to create opportunity and um, networking is such an awful term, but what it really means is just like meeting people and trying to forge connections with people and seeing whether there are opportunities to collaborate has really been like at the essence of like how I've managed to sort of stay afloat, um, and just knowing when something is right and when something is wrong. And obviously that's not a perfect science and it's not always been correct. But you just kind of I've just sort of felt my way out around it. And I feel very fortunate to still be here in 2024 and doing this, like obviously in COVID, like a lot of people lost their jobs and there
Yeah.
was a lot of shift in the business and like I mean I was one of them. I was a sort of COVID casualty in
Yeah.
the business myself, IE was downsizing and making redundancies, and that came at a time where I had hit burnout with the job, and I just put my hand up and I was like, I will take a redundancy. Actually, I don't want to do this anymore,
Hmm.
and quit to nothing because I was just kind of cooked, and I could see the company was going to downscale, and I felt like everyone's name was on the ticket eventually.
Right.
Um, and it took me a few months back then of soul searching and figuring out whether I even wanted to still do it. Um, and so, label world came a few months later, but that really just came from having worked with UNFD uh, in the past because they were the license partner for Net Deep Records in Australia. And so I knew some of the people, and my friend Ollie, uh, who is a manager at Unified Management Arm, works for Polyphia and the Dirty Nil and Gel. He's the singer of Johnny Truant,
Oh,
ex-singer
okay.
of Johnny Truant, and we've been friends since high school. Uh, but when I started realizing that maybe I did want to stay in music, he was someone I hit up, and I was like, "Can you introduce me to like some people at Unified? Like, um, maybe I can sort of forge some connections." And Ollie really helped me like connect with um, the label. And then I realized like, oh, I actually know some of these people. And then, some of the old connections come to pass, and you never know when a chance encounter years later can become like a significant thing. And very much have just kind of, yeah, tumbled around, um, managing to sort of realize when it's important to move or when it's necessary to move. And you just kind of identify those moments and search for new opportunities. And over the years have just learned to try and be really honest with myself and like, is this working? Is
Mm.
that working? I've definitely fallen foul to like giving too much of myself at times, and boundaries are very important in the job. And there's a lot of learning all of the time. And I'm this time around, this sort of chapter of my career, which I hope is now kind of it. I'd like to not tumble around anymore.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm trying to approach it with all the lessons of the past, in my mind, uh, and not repeat the same mistakes, be that for myself or for the artists.
Yeah.
Um, so, for my experience in the music industry, it's been very like hodgepodge all over the place, very patchwork, and I wouldn't know really how to advise anyone
Yeah.
to do it. It's just like you just got to do it, I think.
Yeah.
Like you said, you learn by doing it, and you do it by doing it. Um, and that's really the best practice. And just being able to have accountability and go like, yeah, I fucked that up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I learned from the fact that I fucked that up.
Yeah.
Or like, why did this artist not want to work with me anymore? What are the reasons for that? And it's very easy to be woe is me, and I have been. You have a pity party for yourself, and but over time, that's not useful, and you have to sort of figure out like, why did that happen? And you know that led to, for me, like analyzing that led to me being part of infrastructures. And so I've always tried to stick to infrastructures, but now I try to be a bit more boundaried with my time and stuff like that, and not be like everything has to just be done all of the time. And I think we live in a bit of a culture, don't we, where it's just kind of like do it, do
Go,
it, do
go, go,
it, do
go.
it, do it, do it, go, 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 reply to an email within seconds. And it's like,
Yeah.
is that really healthy? um and so, and the door goes two ways. Like, I try to not expect replies from people immediately unless it's obviously like actually urgent stuff.
Hmm.
And then I just hope that we can, as a general community, just sort of agree like important emails need to be replied to. Other emails, you can take a couple of days if
Yeah.
that's necessary. And let, let's all just be a bit kinder to each other, because it's really tough to work in this business, and it's really tough to be, more than anything, tough to be an artist in 2024. Opportunities are thin on the ground. There are billions of bands. There's always a next band up, as it were.
Yeah.
And all you can control is what you're doing. And you just have to, it's tough to navigate all this stuff. And so I think anyone who's working in the business in whatever capacity, whatever level, like, you have to look after yourself and look after the things you can control, right? And so that's the kind of, I try to take a bit more of that approach with it, like, um, be mindful of the people you're working with and the things that you can and can't control, and the situations that you're in. Um, and so that's all informed by being a bit too much of a workaholic in the past and just kind of go, 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 because I know that that leads to burnout. And
Yeah.
so it's all just lessons all of the time. And I try to be open to all the lessons that I learn from my artists, colleagues, my career, my history, whatever. And um, yeah, like I said, I do feel very glad and fortunate to still be able to do this in 2024, because it's by no means nobody's entitled to anything. I don't feel like entitled to the job. I've just tried to navigate this as best I can and be kind of open and honest to about collaboration and accountability and just kind of own it all. It's all part of my story. Like for me, like failures, successes, whatever, it's all kind of it's all learning.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's one of the key things you can really do now is just kind of always learn and always sort of try and realize the wood for the trees.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm sure there's a lot you can't mention, but what can you talk about that's planned for 2025 that people can be looking forward to?
Well, yeah, so Split Chain are going to be releasing a record at some point. I don't know exactly when, but
Yep.
it will be out. Certainly, there will be new music soon. Uh, there's going to be a bunch of touring. We're working on, they are obviously they're doing the US. We just announced our first US headline show at the tail end of that tour in New York. They're doing Download, Jira. There's a few other festivals that haven't announced yet, but they're doing sort of Slam Dunk, doing like a summer of UK and European festivals, and then we're looking at some other touring activity and some stuff like that. But I imagine a year from now, the Split Chain record is certainly out and in people's ears. So we've definitely got that across the next 12 months is kind of like the launch of the Split Chain album cycle. So that's a very exciting one.
Hmm.
Um, as it is, we have a big project that like I said, we've just signed off on that gets announced in January. Um, we can't talk about that yet, but yeah, that's some really cool stuff happening there. They are making their comeback to the stage at Slam Dunk,
Yep.
um, celebrating 10 years of Never Happy Ever After, their debut album, and there'll be a bunch of other stuff coming off the tail end of that. But that band is definitely they're back. It's not part-time back, it's back. Obviously they are older now and they have jobs and families. And so, it's not going to be touring 10 months of the year every year like it
Yeah.
used to be, but they are back, not just in a nostalgic sense. Um, and then Thornhill, um, there is a lot of new stuff coming. We just released a new single called Nerve. Um, and they are going to be very active also in 2025. Almost none of that is announced yet, but they are going to be very busy and very present. Um, and yeah, that's we just signed an awesome new UK artist who I can't talk about yet, but they're very cool. I love them a lot. And excited to sort of start. It's literally like happened last week, so
Yeah.
um, very excited to start sort of getting into the weeds of all of that. It's another a very me project.
Right.
So I'm psyched on it. And then yeah, I mean the company has all sorts of cool stuff going on, um, like Sleep Token has all sorts of cool things that I don't even know about because that whole thing is like locked up.
Yeah.
Um, you know, but yeah, obviously headlining Download, which is huge. And that we're all very excited about Amira Elfeki and Dead Pony and Caskets and all of these cool bands that are coming through the Future History roster. It feels like a real exciting time for alternative music, I think,
Yeah.
across the board. I mean, with all the great new bands like, you know, bands like Spirit Box and stuff, and Architects and all these bands like Loathe becoming like headline status acts. And it's I think the and then all these amazing pockets of like the hardcore communities and like bands like Knocked Loose, like tearing the fucking glass ceiling all the way off of what a band of that level of extremity can achieve.
Yeah.
And bands like Speed playing Coachella and whatever, like um, I think Turnstile and Knocked Loose have really like set the tone for like if you can be a band that plays whatever fucking music you want and does it in exactly how you want it. You can make it sound exactly how you want it to sound, and you don't have to fucking compromise. And I think that that is an awesome lesson. And I think those bands are like shining examples of like you do absolutely not need to jump on a bandwagon.
Yeah.
You don't need to hear. I think that the metal scene, certainly at what I guess the more mainstream scene, um, has been somewhat homogenized for a few years, and you get these kind of identikit bands, and like one sounds like the other, and it gets to a point where you just can't tell them apart anymore. And certainly, like the metal scene that I grew up in, that's not the case. Like I mean, look at a scene like grunge. It got called grunge. Those bands don't sound alike at all.
Yeah.
Soundgarden do not sound like Alice in Chains, do not sound like Nirvana, do not sound like Pearl Jam. It was a loose bracket to just kind of go, they're from Seattle and they have guitars.
Yeah.
Um, like and then you'd had like bands like Tool touring with Rage Against the Machine, and Metallica was doing the Black Album, which is like a ridiculous arena rock metal record. And like this is the see and band like Faith No More like blowing up on a record like Angel Dust, which
Yeah.
is like not even really a metal record. Like it's a bizarre experimental like art rock record with some good choruses. Like, and then there's the Downward Spiral, and like all these records are just so diverse. And I think that in pursuit of some kind of I don't even know what like pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, in pursuit of that, um, the metal scene became a sort of photocopy of itself. And like you get to the point where it's like, what band am I even listening to?
Yeah.
You know? And I'm not calling out anyone in specific. It just feels like it became very like it's just one thing. The bands kind of look and sound the same.
Yeah.
And I feel like what we're seeing now is a reaction to that. And um, you look at what hardcore is now in 2024, and there's bands in there that you're like, arguably that's a thrash metal band,
Yeah.
arguably that's a death metal band, and much like how I just used the example of grunge, like it's all just like all to play for now. And I think that you know whether whether you appreciate Sleep Token or not, whether you appreciate Bring Me the Horizon or not, whether you appreciate Architect, Spirit Box, whatever or not, like what all these bands have in common is that they have not really anything in common.
Yeah.
Like there's a very distinct identity that a lot of the sort of what I guess the leaders of our scenes now, and the sort of the bands that are starting to sort of bubble to the top. Um, I mean, just look at the download bill this year. Like, it's so diverse. It's so genre diverse. You have bands like Static Dress on there. You have bands like RTO on there. You have bands um, like Split Chain. Then you have bands like Meshuggah. Like, it's starting to look again a bit more like that period in the 90s and early 2000s where everything was just all over the place. And I think that's really exciting because I think being your own character and expressing your own character for your art is the absolute main thing that
Yeah.
keeps music exciting and alive, um, especially, in sort of such weird and unpredictable times on our planet. It can be a pretty scary period out there, um, potentially coming up. And to have like music that is exciting and an escape and inspirational and art that makes you want to create, or the art that makes you feel or whatever, I think is the most, for me, certainly as a kid, it was an enormous escape and a lifeline. And um, I think it's really becoming that place again where like bands are building whole ass worlds for you to like dive into. Um, and it just feels like a very exciting time for our pocket of the sort of art space.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
excited about it in general, man. Excited for our bands and excited to just have the community frothing over with talent, man.
definitely. Well, Leander, thank you very much. We appreciate you
My
taking the
pleasure.
time and
Of
sharing your
course.
stories and experience and stuff. Before I let you go, any final words you want to say? Anything you want to plug or anything?
No, man. Just enjoy yourself.
Yeah,
That's the best thing anybody can do is just try and find the joy in life.
yeah,
Um,
especially in these times.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
It gets harder and harder. It can be the pressures of all this stuff can weigh down on you, and um, you just have to try and find pleasure in life, wherever that may be.
yeah,
I think that would be the thing I would plug. Pleasure in life.
yeah,
Enjoy it.
yeah, definitely. Again, thanks very much, dude. I'll let you
No worries,
go
man.
and
Yeah,
yeah, speak to you soon.
yeah, good chatting to you, man.
Yeah,
Take
you
care, man.
too.
All right, see you later.
And that's it. Thanks so much for tuning in to It's Not a Phase. If you enjoyed this episode, then don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Leave a thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. Follow the podcast on social media, and maybe even join the Patreon or grab some merch from the store. You can find everything that you need at itsnotaphase.co.uk. That's itsnotaphase.co.uk. Thanks again. Hopefully catch you on the next one. And remember, it's not a phase, it's a lifestyle.